Greetings and welcome back, students. This is going to be part 2 of our first lesson. Remember, this is called Unit 1, Foundations of the United States of America. Lesson 1, the American Revolution, and this is part 2. So in our last lesson, part 1, we discussed the causes of why the colonists are going to seek independence from Great Britain. And some of those causes, remember, included the taxation that the British were perpetrating against us without our representation in Parliament. Remember that those taxes had been caused because of the big war, the 7 Years' War, or in the United States, we call it the French and Indian War. The British had had a long period of salutary neglect, which is a fancy way of saying that they weren't really, interfering with us. Their form of mercantilism, where they used the colony to profit themselves, they were not really enforcing it. We talked a lot about this, and kind of a good example to think about is, typically at the beginning of a school year, a teacher on the first day or first week of school would go over their syllabus, their classroom expectations, and the rules. And they might say something like, you kids don't have cell phones during class while I'm lecturing, because it's really distracting. It is. I know, because I got my phone and it's very distracting. You shouldn't do that. And they'll say, if you have your cell phone out while I'm lecturing, then this will be the consequences. Okay. Then the following week, a kid has their phone out and the teacher just says, "Oh, put it away. Let's just ignore this one." And then 2 weeks after that, the kid has their phone out again, and the teacher just doesn't really say anything. And then another month passes, and then suddenly, like, most of the kids have their cell phones like on their laps or on their desk, and they're on them, and it's very distracting. But the teacher hasn't really done a whole lot. Then they come back after Christmas holiday in January, and the teacher looks around at all these students, on their cell phones, and she says, "What are you kids doing? I told y'all the first day that y'all were not supposed to have your cell phones out. This is not acceptable. Blah 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 blah." And the students just do what? They roll their eyes and they ignore the teacher because she didn't enforce those rules that she had set up. That is exactly what Britain had done to the United States, to the 13 colonies, because we weren't the United States yet. Britain had laid out that these colonies were going to be for the profit of the mother country, for Britain, and that their raw materials would go over to Britain in this triangular trade, and the colonies would buy up the finished products from Britain exclusively, so that the United Kingdom would have a guaranteed market for its goods, and it would profit. But those navigation laws were not enforced for, like 100 years, from the 1660s or something, all the way through. They were not enforced. And now here, Britain suddenly is trying to enforce the rules. You can't do that. You have to be consistent throughout, or it just will not work. And that was what they ran up into. Another cause of the American Revolution that we talked about is the fact that the colonies have been independent for so long. They had their own form of governance, their own courts, their own justice systems. They were very used to independence, and that independent thought was also espoused by ideas at the time, like the Enlightenment, with philosophers like Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, saying that governments exist not because of a divine absolute monarch, but through the will of the people. We make the government. As Lincoln will later say during the American Civil War, it's a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. These are Enlightenment ideas. And also that people, as an individual, we're born with certain unalienable rights, rights that no one can take away from us, such as life, liberty, and property. And through events in the early part of the 1700s, like the Great Awakening, people were kind of roused to believe in the power of the individual and to question authority. And so all of this kind of sifts around together, and the British keep doing their taxes unfairly, unjustly. Many protested, and we get this revolution. And the first shots fired We're at the Boston Massacre that Paul Revere famously engraved or stole the engraving from, according to various accounts. But that was March 5th, 1770. The first actual battles of the American Revolution don't occur until April of 1775. And those were the battles in Massachusetts at Lexington and Concord. By this point, this is after the Boston Tea Party, after the Sons of Liberty had boarded those ships carrying the British East India tea crates and had dumped them into the harbor. Now, actually, during the Tea Party, a couple things that students often don't know is that it was a very solemn affair, even though the Sons of Liberty were dressed up as Mohican Indians and they had, tomahawks and war paint and feathers and all this stuff. They were very quiet. They were very kind of almost peaceful. They were very careful not to break any of the property, very careful on the ships, the sails and the piers and the port. They broke like one lock on one ship, and two of the Sons of Liberty were ordered immediately to go run into Boston downtown and go purchase a new lock to replace the one that they'd broken. The only thing that they damaged was the crates of tea. Now, the reason for that is because they're trying to demonstrate that they are orderly and civilized, and they are carrying out a uniform protest to illustrate the wrong of what England was doing to them, forcing them to buy this overpriced British tea instead of having the freedom to buy tea from elsewhere that was much cheaper. And fundamentally, also, it goes back to no taxation without representation. So that was 1773 at the end of the year. Lexington and Concord, April 1775. By this point, the British had taken over, like through martial law, through the Intolerable Acts, Massachusetts. They closed Boston Harbor. Soldiers were everywhere, and there was a royal governor in charge of the colony. And he wants to go after the leaders of the Sons of Liberty, Samuel Adams and John Hancock. And so those guys were hanging out in Lexington, and basically Dr. Warren, one of the members of the Sons of Liberty there in Boston, got word that General Gage, the governor, was sending out a group of British redcoats, British soldiers, to go and arrest Samuel Adams and John Hancock, and they needed to get out of Lexington. And so he dispatched two riders. He dispatched William Dawes, and he dispatched also famously Paul Revere. And this is where the famous one if by land, two if by sea in the Old North Church, the lanterns that they would hung, that's where all that comes from, which direction the British troops would take. Because at this point, Boston, the city, was basically like almost an island. It was on a peninsula. The Charles Harbor, and Charlestown was on the other side of it. And so these riders, they're racing on their horses down the road to warn that not the British are coming. They wouldn't say that because these were all British citizens. The colonists were British. The soldiers were British. Everybody was British. So they didn't shout, the British are coming. Instead, they were probably very quietly door to door knocking and saying, hey, the redcoats are coming. Hey, the lobsters are coming. The soldiers are coming. That would be more appropriate than screaming and alerting everybody to your presence and saying, the British are coming. Oh my God. We're all British. What are you talking about? And so they get to Lexington, and it's cool, and they warn Samuel Adams, John Hancock, and they escape. So that was all good. And then on the road to Concord, they team up with this other member of the Sons of Liberty, this young, handsome doctor who at 1 a.m. was mysteriously leaving the house of his fiancée. That's how the story goes anyway. Wonder what he was doing there at 1 a.m. Interesting, right? Warning kids, this show can get PG-13 sometimes. Ooh. But yeah, this young doctor that they met was also part of the Sons of Liberty. His name was Samuel Prescott. He was rumored to have been one of the most eligible, handsome young men in all of Massachusetts. Ladies, there you go. In 1775 anyway. They team up with him. So the three of them are going down the road. They're almost to Concord, where the Sons of Liberty had stored most of their gunpowder and their munitions, their weapons. and they're going to go get to that and warn everybody before the British soldiers can arrive. And Dawes and Paul Revere himself actually get routed, and Paul Revere gets captured. Dawes falls off his horse, and it's only Samuel Prescott, this young doctor, this young handsome doctor, that is able to go all the way to Concord and warn the people there. And they basically are able to thwart the British. And the first battle at Lexington early that morning was not very good. Nobody's sure exactly who fired the first shot, but on the Lexington Green, some American patriots known as the Minutemen gave their lives for this new cause of America. And the American Revolution is on. It's on like Donkey Kong, several hundred years before they had any clue what that was. And then the soldiers, they march into Concord, but because of the riders, the Midnight Riders, Dawes, Prescott, and Paul Revere, they were warned, well, mainly thanks to Mr. Prescott. And at Concord, there's actually several hundred Minutemen, so-called, because these colonists were able to prepare their militias, their own little city guardsmen, within a minute, there to confront the British. And there was a fire that broke out. Everybody kind of had to do a timeout and put the fire out together because this is the 1700s. And then there was the North Bridge, and they were able to make a stand there. And then suddenly the British are retreating. And on the way back, the retreat becomes very disorderly. All the British are kind of running to get back to Boston with their tail between their legs because the Minutemen had come out of the woodwork. There's thousands of Minutemen taking pot shots at these British soldiers as they go back to Boston. And that, of course, was a huge disgrace for General Gage, for the British Crown. This cannot be allowed to stand. And the American Revolution, the fighting is on. But we are not yet an independent nation because the declaration that declares us free from Britain had not yet been written. So all that Lexington and Concord, the shot heard around the world, the first battles of the American Revolution, that occurred in April of 1775. The fighting will continue. The Continental Army will be gathered up and put under the direction of George Washington, who at this point in time, he's a little older and wiser than he was when he accidentally began the first global war, the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War. He'll be in charge of that. But we need some organization. We need to actually, figure out who we are and what our guiding principles will be. And then we can also maybe help our army to get a little bit better organized once we figure those things out. We got to declare our independence, which is how we get the Declaration of Independence. The Continental Congress in its second meeting is going to decide to formally separate from Britain. They choose the young author Thomas Jefferson from Virginia to write it, but he was part of a committee of 5 actually. Also included as kind of editors for Thomas Jefferson were old John Adams there. Remember, he defended those troops, those British soldiers at the Boston Massacre, and Benjamin Franklin from Pennsylvania, the Quaker, very, very famous inventor and diplomat. So they're Ben Franklin and John Adams, they're going to help edit this draft that Thomas Jefferson, the Virginian, writes. And in the Declaration of Independence, it's basically, think of it as our breakup letter. We are breaking up with Britain. We say, we don't want to be with you anymore. We don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. We are going to be our own separate country. And we list, after we kind of introduce, that's what our purpose is. Then we go on to, in the middle section of this, list a whole bunch of our complaints, why we're going to be breaking up. These are called the grievances. So if you have ever had the displeasure of breaking up with someone, I hope that you have never either been broken up with or had to break up with somebody. It's a terrible experience, but you're teenagers, so you probably will go through that at some point if you haven't already. You want to make sure I'm giving you tips for how to break up. You want to make sure that you explain why you're doing what you're doing, because otherwise that person's going to be left with a lot of questions, a lot of heartache. They need to have what's called closure, right? And the only way to give them closure is to explain your reasoning. And so that's what we do in the Declaration of Independence, in America's breakup letter to Britain. We explain this is why we don't want to be with you no more. It's because you're taxing us unfairly. It's because your king is like a tyrant who thinks he can do whatever he wants. We're breaking up with you because you have these admiralty courts. There's no justice there. These judges are bought off by the crown. They're not interested in finding out if we're really guilty or innocent. And plus, we have to travel months along an ocean where we might die just to get to these courts where we're supposed to be judged on our guilt or innocence. The writs of assistance, the violation of privacy that those represent. All of these things and more are listed in our grievances, why we are breaking up with Great Britain. And then at the end, in the final section of the Declaration of Independence, we say, we hereby declare ourselves free and independent. Now, are we the United States of America yet? No. Hold on till lesson 2 for that, because we don't yet have a constitution. We don't yet have a working government. Keep that in mind, that this Declaration of Independence is not a governing document. It doesn't say, oh, well, we need a president and we need a Congress. We're going to need a couple Supreme Court justices. We're going to have some federalism, some checks and balances, all that good stuff. No, 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 no. No. It doesn't do any of that. All the Declaration of Independence does is says we're independent from Britain. It breaks us up. So we are no longer part of Britain. Now, of course, fundamentally, principally, it does set up the values that this new eventual country we hope to create should stand for. It kind of, expresses our will, our basis, what we're going to be about, but it is not a governing document. The famous section of the Declaration of Independence, see if you can say it with me or just murmur it like y'all do in class when I ask you to say something out loud. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that to secure those rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to create a new government. That is in the second paragraph, kind of in the introductory section of the Declaration of Independence, and those ideas are stripped directly, like I'm talking total infringement on copyright, from the English philosopher of the Enlightenment, John Locke. Life, liberty, and property just becomes life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, thanks to maybe Franklin's edit on Jefferson's work. By the way, Benjamin Franklin never becomes a president of the United States. You know why, kids? Because he was old. Because he's going to be too old to become president. Thomas Jefferson, the writer, the main writer of the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson will go on to become our third president of the United States. And if you watched Hamilton on Disney Plus over the summer, or anytime, you should totally check it out. Hamilton is amazing. It's this musical about our founding fathers and everything. Then you kind of have an idea about Thomas Jefferson, his love of France, and his rivalry with Alexander Hamilton and all that. But Jefferson will be our third president. Some of the basic ideas and guiding principles established in the Declaration of Independence, that all people have unalienable rights. Unalienable means a right that you are born with, something that can never be taken from you. You have a right to your life, to live the way you want. You have a right to freedom. Liberty means that you have a right to choice, to decide what you want to do with your life, who you want to be with, what you want to work as, where you want to live. Now, of course, there is hypocrisy in this document. To be a hypocrite means what? You say one thing and then you do the opposite, right? Like I'm a hypocrite when it comes to soda. Like, I love soda. I love Big Red, Dr. Pepper. Those are my favorites. And I will say they're not healthy for you. Don't drink soda. It's terrible for you. And then I'll be drinking, Big Red. I'm a hypocrite. That's what a hypocrite does. Say one thing and then does the opposite. Thomas Jefferson, he says, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Never mind the fact that he's ignoring, half the population, ignoring women. Women are not part of this because women were not equal at this time in any sense of the word. But also when he says all men are created equal, he's ignoring the fact that there are all of these enslaved people in the colonies, people who are not equal at all. In fact, Thomas Jefferson himself was a slave owner. Thomas Jefferson, in fact, not only owned many, many hundreds of slaves at his plantation in Virginia called Monticello, he famously also carried on a lengthy affair with one of his slave women named Sally Hemings. Now, yes, Jefferson's wife, Martha, had died, and he had promised on her deathbed that he would never remarry, so he was a widower. And yes, Sally Hemings was mulatto. She was half white, half black. Her father, in fact, the slave woman that Jefferson is going to have children with, was actually the father of Jefferson's former wife, the woman who had died, Martha Jefferson. So this was his dead wife's half sister, which is just crazy and kind of icky, but also maybe romantic, question mark, I don't know. But yeah, he carried on this relationship, and regardless of Sally Hemings, and her children that they had, loved him or not, and he loved her, that doesn't matter, because she was a slave and she had no say in that relationship. And here he is writing in one of the most important documents in human history, that sets up the course for the United States of America and sets up the course for so many of the Western nations of the world, and South America and France and Europe and others. He says all men are created equal, and he owned human beings. That's enormous hypocrisy. But during this time period, you have to understand, this is the 1700s. There were ideas, certainly Jefferson and other founding fathers, even Washington owned slaves. They saw slavery as an evil thing, but they also saw it as inescapable. This is prior to the Industrial Revolution. And this was a common mindset at the time. So he probably didn't see the hypocrisy in the same startling way that we see the hypocrisy today. But it is there, and you should be very aware of it. And that forms also the basis for the current debate over, should we honor and venerate statues of people like Washington and Jefferson? Now, I'm not even going to get into the debate on Civil War statues because that's ridiculous. Those people lost. They were traitors to the United States, and yet there are statues of them throughout the South. But that's for my college course where we actually cover the Civil War. But yeah, Washington, Jefferson, they certainly had huge parts in founding this country, but they also owned slaves. Founding fathers that did not own slaves, Alexander Hamilton from New York, he did not own slaves. He's actually originally from the Caribbean, just like in the musical, they sing about that. John Adams, our second president, with his Puritan roots, he's from Massachusetts. He never owned slaves, definitely did not. And there were others, but this is part of our legacy, part of our founding, and part of the hypocrisy from which this nation was built. However, it doesn't totally strip the ideas that it was founded on. Just because these ideas were hypocritical at the time doesn't mean that they were good ideas. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. That was a very good, very beautiful, very new idea during this time period, and it helped bring humanity forward in a great leap. Another idea espoused in the Declaration of Independence and kind of that introductory paragraph, by the will of the people, the governments are formed by the will of people. That comes from Thomas Hobbes and the social contract theory. That's the idea of popular sovereignty. the will of the people, that we rule ourselves. And you'll see that when we get to our governing document, the Constitution, because in its first three words, it starts off with "we the people of the United States," in order to form a more perfect union, establish, this country. That's called popular sovereignty, where popular meaning the people, sovereignty means rule. We rule ourselves. And we don't do it with a direct democracy. We do not have a democracy. Democracy is where we directly rule ourselves. That has almost never existed. Even in ancient Athens, they didn't especially rule themselves. It was only a certain subset of the rich and powerful of the city that ruled. Women, slaves, of course, they were not part of that democracy. And in America, we do not rule ourselves. We vote for others who rule over us, representing our interests. This is why what we have, our form of government, is called representative, because we elect those who rule us to represent us. That's also called a republic. And in fact, the founding fathers, they greatly admired the Roman Republic, not the Roman Empire, and the Roman senators. That's why many of the founding fathers, when they wrote essays defending the Constitution and other ideas that they had, they took on the pseudonyms of Roman senators, such as Cato. And the unalienable rights, remember, rights that nobody can take from you. So here's a little chart kind of showing some of the things that we were talking about there. What were the Enlightenment ideas expressed in the Declaration of Independence from John Locke? That all people are entitled to those unalienable rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You have equality, all men are created equal. We talked about the hypocrisy with that. Don't forget, women are not part of that. Slaves are not part of that. So that was just referring to men of over the age of 21, men over the age of 21 who were white and who owned property and were Protestant. It was a very selective group that was implied by that word men right there. That the fact those five groups, that was the only group really that could participate in our government at the beginning of our country, in most states, because remember, states are also going to have a say of their own. We exist in federalism. That's the idea. States and countries share the power between them. Consent of the governed from Hobbes, that this is popular sovereignty, that government gets its power directly from the people. We created this government for us. Basically, like what Lincoln says, that this government gets its power because we believe in it and we follow its laws, and we made these laws to benefit all of us. Social contract theory. And if a government becomes destructive, like Britain was doing, taking advantage of its people, not listening to its people, the no taxation without representation, then it's the responsibility of the people to alter or change or just get rid of, that means abolish, that government, and to create a new one. And that's exactly what it says in the Declaration of Independence. Now, last thing I want to talk about here in lesson 2 is the idea of our values, the values that the United States of America has. Those are set up in the Declaration of Independence, great aspiring ideas that we are still striving as a nation to achieve, that all people are created equal and entitled to those unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are great values that were written in our Declaration of Independence in 1776, when the American Revolution was just starting. And by 1783, Yorktown, the American Revolution ends. We go through this period of the Articles of Confederation. First, government doesn't really work. And then we have the Constitution. And by 1787, the Constitutional Convention ratifies the Constitution. And George Washington, 1789, becomes our first president of the United States. And we have the United States of America kind of as we know it by that point. In 1791, the Bill of Rights was added. But here it is, by the 1830s, you have a young Frenchman, Alexis de Tocqueville. I'm going to say that again because it's French. C'est pas le vrai français. Does anybody speak French? Probably not, so I'm going to say his name again, just because you need to remember it. Alexis de Tocqueville. He comes over supposedly to visit like America's prison systems or something with his buddy. Like they're these rich noblemen from France, but really he's here to like get a sense and feel for our people and our culture and our governance. And he tours all around the United States in the 1830s. This is like a good, 50 years after America's been founded or whatnot. And he identifies 5 values that make America just awesome. It makes us the best country in the world. It makes us, awesome sauce, better than everywhere else, even better than France. And he also, to be fair, does also identify some things that weren't so great in America at the time, like slavery, which he says rightly America will eventually have to reconcile with. But these 5 values have endured. De Tocqueville's 5 values of what makes America different, unique, than the rest of the world, especially for that time. We were a great experiment, and we still are to this day. So here they are, the 5 values of de Tocqueville, what America has that makes it different and good. The first one is populism. Populism is the idea that, the people come together and I'm sorry, my brain is blanking. I've been talking for too long. I'm sorry. I know this video is too long now also. But popular sovereignty, okay, that's the people rule, the people are the ones in charge. That's populism. Individualism, the power of the individual versus society. Remember that in most other nations, you're part of this collective. You're not supposed to have your individual beliefs. You're not supposed to have your individual values. In America, you're supposed to celebrate the individual and what makes you unique. Liberty, that's freedom. Freedom again to choose what you want to do, who you want to be, what you want to believe. Laissez-faire, that is a dirty French word, laissez-faire. That means let it be. And what it's actually referring to is our capitalist free market economic style, that in our country we allow businesses to operate free from government interference. That's capitalism. So laissez-faire, business is free to do as it wants, which is hopefully make a lot of money. And then finally, egalitarianism, which is a long, long word, which just means equality. Egalitarianism, we are a society where everybody's supposed to be treated equally. So these 5 values: populism, we the people are in charge; individualism, the power of the independent person; liberty, freedom, laissez-faire, capitalism, the free market; and egalitarianism, equality. Those are what make America special. And yes, I purposely used that word special, because we are special. It also sets up the idea of America, what is it called? American, I forget. Okay, it's American exceptionalism. The idea that we've had since the founding of Plymouth Colony, and the idea that the Massachusetts Bay Colony, sorry, and John Winthrop and all this, the city upon a hill and all this, that is the idea that we are special and better than others. And these 5 values are kind of what we put up for that, American exceptionalism. Okay, that is going to definitely do it. I'm about done. I'm sure you guys are, but that is lesson 1 of our first unit, foundations. So the American Revolution lesson is done. What you need to do now is you need to go to the bottom of your last page of your notes and make sure you do a line there to separate it from your notes, and that's where you're going to write your summary. Your summary needs to answer our essential question: what were the causes and effects of the American Revolution? So you need to answer the causes in complete sentences. You might start off with something like, the causes of the American Revolution were, and then you would go into what we talked about in your notes. So there it is. Put it into sentences. This is here to help you. And then you're going to discuss the effects. The effects of the American Revolution are that we became an independent country. We declared our independence, and now we are no longer with Britain. We are going to be our own thing based on these ideas, these values. All right. And once you're done with your summary, that is the end of lesson 1. Thank you guys very much. And I will talk to you later.